Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit of a weird topic. So I'm going to be talking about why your conventions are dying. So I'm going to be specifically talking about sort of pop culture events, and I'm going to be going into it so that you have a bit more of an understanding. So if you're new and you don't know my background, I used to work in the convention industry, still kind of do sometimes. So I was working in there for 8 years. I've had a variety of roles. Programming, so like all those panel type things, community management. I've been in a lot of different roles within that. So I wanted to kind of bestow my knowledge onto you and give you a little bit of an insight. So let's get straight into it. So just so you know, I have everything that's in this video in Word written form, and that's just going to be in the description below. So if you're interested in that, go straight to it. Thanks for just bearing with that for a second. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is something called LobbyCon. So if you don't know what LobbyCon is when people loiter outside the event but don't necessarily take part in the event. They won't go inside, they'll loiter outside. And we see this really prominent with cosplayers, where they stay outside, they get photos, and then they leave the event. It's kind of almost like a gathering spot for people to take part in all of the fun parts that cosplayers like about the event. I'm not saying this is just cosplayers. This also goes back to regular attendees that loiter outside the event. So just keep that in mind. For this section though, I'm going to be specifically talking about cosplayers in LobbyCon. So LobbyCon has happened for a few reasons. So one is the rising cost of ticket prices. Ticket prices seem to be going up and up every single year, and there's less and less value for cosplayers to be in attendance. Like, you know, we all have competitions and panels and sometimes cosplay guests, but other than that, there's not a lot of value in being there. Like, a lot of conventions actually restrict photos being taken on the show floor, and the less and less you're able to do that, there's not much reason to go. So I'm talking from the perspective of a cosplayer. Like, I am a cosplayer, and this is not by means the perspective of all cosplayers. This is just what I found in my personal experience. So this is done differently in other conventions, which do encourage cosplayers to come into the show or come into part of the show. And one of these examples is in Japan. So I've put a little bit more information about that in the article, so I won't dive too much into that. Conventions also struggle to bring in cosplay guests as well, and this isn't from a financial perspective. It's, for one, conventions don't know what the audience want to see. Conventions aren't aware, and there's no monetary value out of cosplayers attending these events. In most cases, there are some exceptions to this. Either way, I'm not going to go into this too much. I do have another article that does relate to conventions and why they bring in cosplay guests, so I'll link that below, and yeah, either way, yeah, check that out. So the next point I'm going to go into is why it's actually a problem. Let's face it, like, cosplayers are an attraction to the event. So cosplayers, or any attraction, is outside the event. People go to that attraction. They're not on the show floor, and they're not spending money. Exhibitors don't meet their sales targets, then they don't buy booths for the next year. Events can't cater to a growing audience, they have to downsize, and eventually this might lead to the closure of an event. So this is just my general thought process, and there is so much more that goes into this. This isn't just a defined flowchart about this sort of thing. So just keep that in mind when you think about this. This isn't the be-all end-all. It's not just LobbyCon. And I'm going to dive into the next point. So the next point that I'm going to touch on is essentially our horrible, horrible economy right now. So economical factors always play into events in some way, shape or form. It affects people's buying habits, it affects trends within the marketplace, it affects a lot of things. So have you noticed that ticket prices seem to be going up year on year, and maybe booth prices go up year on year? There's a bunch of different factors to this happening, and I'm going to go into all of them a little bit later in this video. But one of them is the state of our economy right now. So essentially what happens generally is inflation happens. And in 1999 they predicted where inflation was going, and it's drastically changed. So it's gone up. Prices of things have gone up an additional like 25 to 30%. and wages have gone down about 5% compared to where they projected things to be within that space of time. Now, this isn't a one-size-fits-all model. There is so much financial stuff and economic stuff that plays into it. However, I'm no expert, so I'm not going to dive straight into that. There is also articles on why millennials in particular tend to struggle with this. And I've got more information in the article, so do just check that out down below. So why is this a problem? Essentially, it's one of the things that drive up prices of things, and events have operational costs that they need to cover and they need to make back. And year on year, it's getting tougher and tougher to generate the ticket sales to cover this cost. And some events that I've worked on even borrow profits from the following year in order to make that money back. And eventually that will kill an event. There's a really good example of this that happened with a musical festival, so outside of the convention, pop culture type of space. Essentially what happened with this event is their profits were going down and they needed ways to bring in more people. So they had bigger guests that cost them a lot more money, and they even announced some guests that weren't confirmed in order to drive those sales. So I've linked an article down below, so be sure to check that out if you want to know a little bit more. However, it's not just ticket sales that are dropping. Exhibitor sales are dropping. They're finding it a little bit more difficult to stay afloat in the economy. That means they don't buy space at the event, which is a big profit turn for a lot of events. And if exhibitors don't exist at the event, you don't have an event. So in the grand scheme of things, everything around is losing a bit of profit because of this whole change in the economy. So either way, look, I'm going to move on to my next point. Okay, so my next point is a little bit of a strange one, but bear with me, please. So the event gets too big. I'm specifically going to be talking about fan-created events. So fan-created events are essentially events that are started by fans, not event specialists, not anyone with a background in events. They are purely fans. And essentially when an event like this occurs, a lot of people are volunteers. They volunteer their time because they love the fandom and they want to be part of it. Fan-created events are things that don't normally function on a salary process. It's not normally catered for in the beginning, and then that kind of means it never really gets catered for. There isn't enough of a profit in order to make the money back, in order to pay people. As people who are volunteers for an event, the amount of work that they can do is restricted. They have lives, they have things that they do outside of the event. They can't dedicate their whole life to this. People need money. People need to get paid. Yeah. Sorry, that was weird. So eventually what happens to these events is there is a massive increase in the workload, which leads to stress and fatigue, which can lead to a higher turnover in staff. Volunteer staff can really walk out at any time, and there is often no handover procedure for this, which means that every time there is a new staff member, they have no idea where the previous member left off. This isn't the same for all events, but a lot of the time they have to start from scratch, which can lead to poor management, and in turn, that's something that can really affect an event. For obvious reasons, if the event is managed poorly, then it's going to strain relationships, not only with fans, but exhibitors, guests, all of those things that create an event, and in turn, that's something that can really affect an event. So let's move on to my next point. Okay, so the next point that I have is about the format of these events. The format of these events is outdated and is dying. So when pop culture events first started, like conventions, Comic-Cons, etc., when they first started, they were a hub for fans, for exhibitors to market to a very concentrated audience. And we could get products, and we could really dive into our fandom, and we could hoard all those wonderful things that we wanted, so we could express our fandom and fill up our walls with posters and have an amount of plushies that kind of take over your bed. Yeah, let's go back to the topic. Now, however, we have the internet. We don't really need to go to a con. We can do it from the comfort of our own home. So because of the internet, let's blame the internet, exhibitors don't want to attend the event because they're not making enough money to justify them being there to support their business. Now, I'm not saying all events are like this. Gaming events are a really good example of something that doesn't follow this structure. In gaming events such as PAX and Tokyo Game Show, I'm not going to go too much into Tokyo Game Show, it's a completely different audience, is they rely more on engaging content than retail exhibitors. So what I mean by this is when you go to a gaming event, you get to play the game. You get to be involved in the community, and PAX does this in a really good way. The retail focus is limited. It's about pushing the promotion of a new game, but it's not like the game shop you see on the corner and you can just buy anything from. And the main idea behind these events, especially PAX, is to drive community-driven content and engaging content. So let's compare this to pop culture and comic-style events, where they now focus on guests to drive ticket sales, which is one of the things that drove these types of events in the first place. So the resolution to a lot of problems that a convention has is get better guests. But it's only a small part of a lot of the problems that these events have, and I hope that I've explained that a little bit in this video. The whole guest thing is a completely different thing, and I could talk for days on it, so I'm not going to go over it in this video. Either way, look, I hope that this video has been informative, and I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight into my perspective on why events might be struggling these days. Not all events are struggling, but some are, and I hope this is giving you some information on that. Well, that's it. I've run out of things to talk about. You're welcome. I'm gonna go eat some strawberries now. Be sure to hit the red button and hit subscribe. Yeah, that really helps me out. Be sure to also press the thumbs up, not the thumbs down. I'm very fragile and need boosters to my self-esteem lately. And also check out some other videos. Like, I'm gonna put them here. They're pretty cool. I'm gonna quit embarrassing myself now. Bye!